I never thought my own parents would betray me in such a casual, devastating way. One Sunday evening, as we sat around their polished oak dining table in Naperville, Illinois, my father slid a set of keys across the table with deliberate finality. My mother's face glowed with false warmth as she said, "Rachel, honey, we've decided it would be best for your sister Claire to stay at your apartment for a few months. She needs the space more than you do." The room seemed to tilt. My apartment, the place I had poured years of work and sacrifice into, the one space in the world that felt truly mine. And here they were, my own parents, acting as if my sanctuary were nothing more than an extra storage unit they could hand off to the child they always favored. Claire sat across from me, her smirk barely concealed. She twirled a strand of perfectly highlighted hair around her finger and added, "Don't worry, Rach. I'll keep everything super clean this time." Her words dripped with mockery, as if we both didn't remember the countless times she'd left chaos in her wake. I looked at each of them in silence. My father's confident authority, my mother's pleading eyes, Claire's smugness. They expected me to play my role, the dependable daughter who always gave in, the one who carried the weight so Claire could float free. For 31 years, I had done exactly that. But not tonight. "That's funny," I said, steadying my voice, "because I haven't lived in that apartment for 6 weeks." The silence that followed was almost theatrical. My mother's fork clattered against her plate. My father blinked, trying to process what I had just said. Claire's smirk vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Yes, I had already left, and the truth behind why I made that choice is the story I need to tell you. My name is Rachel Miller, and at 31 years old, I thought I had finally built a life of my own. For years, I lived in the shadow of Claire, the daughter who could do no wrong. She was coddled, celebrated, and rescued at every turn, while I was told to be grateful for being independent. When I bought that apartment in River North, it wasn't just a home. It was proof that I had survived without their help. Hardwood floors, thrifted furniture, even the little kitchen island I refinished with my own hands. Every inch of that place represented freedom. But then Claire started showing up uninvited. At first it was small, borrowing a dress here, a handbag there. Soon, I would come home to find her lounging on my couch, waving off my shock with a breezy, "Just needed sister time." It escalated to parties, strangers using my dishes, and worst of all, my private journal spread open on my bed. The apartment that symbolized everything I had fought for no longer felt safe. And when I realized my parents would always side with her, always excuse her, I knew the only way to protect myself was to disappear. That's why I left 6 weeks before that dinner. That's why, when my parents thought they were handing Claire the keys to my life, they had no idea they were already too late. What happened after that moment, the fallout, the confrontations, the painful truth, is a story about boundaries, betrayal, and the freedom that comes when you finally decide to put yourself first. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit subscribe and stay tuned to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the forgotten daughter. Because that's who I was, forgotten. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, in a neat suburban house where the hedges were trimmed just right and the curtains always matched. To outsiders, we looked like a picture-perfect family. A hard-working dad, a devoted mom, and 2 daughters. But inside those walls, it was always clear there was only room for one star, and her name was Claire. Let me paint you a picture. My 16th birthday. I had begged for months to host a small dinner at my favorite pizza place with a handful of friends. Nothing extravagant, just laughter, a few slices, and the kind of memory every teenager wants. When the day came, my parents forgot. My mom was busy driving Claire, who was 11 at the time, to a dance recital. My dad stayed late at the office. I ended up ordering a single pizza, eating alone in my room, staring at college brochures while pretending it didn't matter. Now, fast forward 5 years to Claire's Sweet 16. They rented out an entire banquet hall, complete with a DJ, a catered buffet, and balloons filling the ceiling. And outside, waiting like the grand finale of some coming-of-age movie, was a used car wrapped in a massive red bow. I stood in the corner, clapping politely, but all I could think about was my own lonely night with a greasy cardboard box. School achievements? Same pattern. I became salutatorian, gave speeches, won awards in debate. But at my high school graduation, while I was on stage speaking to an entire auditorium, my mother's camera wasn't pointed at me. It was fixed on Claire, who was just sitting in the crowd. And that wasn't an accident. That was the story of my life. Working twice as hard, receiving half as much attention. But nothing cut as deeply as the day I overheard my mom speaking to a neighbor after a school event. I was 17, clutching my debate medal in the hallway, when I heard her laugh softly and say, "Claire just needs us more. Rachel will be fine. She always is." Those words felt like a verdict. They had decided who we were. Claire would be the delicate one, the one to protect, the one to pour energy and resources into. I would be the strong one, the dependable one, the child who needed nothing. And once they placed us in those roles, nothing I did could change it. That night, I sat in my room, the medal heavy in my palm, and I realized something painful. It didn't matter how much I achieved. It didn't matter how hard I worked. To my family, I was invisible. So I adapted. I stopped asking for recognition. I stopped expecting applause. I taught myself to smile through disappointment, to laugh off neglect, to pretend indifference. But that kind of invisibility doesn't fade. It sinks into your bones, and it follows you into adulthood, shaping every decision you make, even when you think you've broken free. That was the beginning of my story. A childhood that taught me how to disappear long before I ever chose to walk away. College was supposed to be the reward for hard work, the chance to finally stand on equal ground. I believed in that dream, the way only an 18-year-old can, convinced that if I poured in enough effort, the universe would meet me halfway. So I worked. Mornings started at a coffee shop, refilling cups before sunrise. Evenings belonged to the campus library, where I shelved books until my back screamed. Weekends, I tied on an apron and carried plates until my hands shook. 3 jobs, no margin for error. Every dollar had a destination. Rent, textbooks, bus fare, tuition at Northwestern. My parents' contribution was always the same, $500 a semester. They called it what we can afford. I called it barely a dent. Claire's experience was the mirror opposite. She enrolled at DePaul, changed majors more than once, and when stress hit, she jetted off to Europe for a semester of finding herself. My parents not only covered tuition, but also paid her rent, her groceries, even hired tutors when classes felt too hard. They explained it by saying Claire needed more support, while I was capable. The word capable turned into a life sentence. It meant I was expected to survive with less. At first, I told myself not to be bitter. Independence was supposed to be empowering, right? Professors praised me for balancing work in school. Managers admired my reliability. Friends said I was inspiring. But inspiration doesn't pay tuition. Every time I balanced my checkbook, my chest tightened. I carried stress like a second backpack, heavier than any stack of textbooks. Then came the moment that broke something inside me. My grandmother invited me to lunch at a little diner she loved, the kind with cracked booths and perfect pie. We talked about classes, and she smiled with that soft pride only grandmothers carry. Then she said it. "I'm glad the fund is helping." I froze. "What fund?" "The college fund," she said. "I started one for you when you were born. Your mother promised it would go toward your tuition. She said she transferred money for you last year." My fork clattered against the plate. My stomach dropped. "Grandma, I never saw a cent of that." Her smile faltered. She touched my hand gently. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." That night, on the bus back to campus, my phone buzzed. A text from Claire. A photo of her standing in front of a cathedral, arms wide, captioned, "Europe is saving my soul. Thanks for believing in me." A string of heart emojis followed. I stared at it until my screen dimmed, my throat tight. Later, Grandma slipped me photocopies of the account statements. My name was there, plain as day. Transfers marked tuition support. The dates lined up perfectly, with Claire's trip abroad. When I confronted my mother, she sighed heavily, as if I were being unreasonable. She said money was complicated, that Claire's program abroad was educational, that I was smart enough to win scholarships anyway. She ended with, "Rachel, don't make me feel guilty for doing my best." And somehow, by the end of the call, I found myself apologizing to her. Apologizing for daring to question why the money meant for me had been rerouted to Claire. When the line went silent, I sat in my tiny rented room and realized something painful. Even what was mine could be taken. Even when the intention was clear, my needs would always come second. It wasn't just unfair. It was a pattern written in ink, a script my family never intended to change. When I signed the closing papers and held the keys to my first apartment in River North, I felt a surge of pride so strong it left me dizzy. Years of extra shifts, skipped vacations, and hand-me-down clothes had finally bought me something no one could dismiss. Proof that I could create a life on my own. The apartment wasn't large, but to me, it was everything. 900 square feet of hardwood floors that glowed under the morning light, exposed brick that whispered character, and windows that framed the city skyline like moving art. The kitchen barely fit a table, so I found a battered island secondhand and spent an entire weekend sanding, painting, and sealing it. That piece became my dining table, my desk, my anchor. Every item in the apartment told a story. A gray sectional I bought after 6 months of overtime. A mismatched bedroom set collected from thrift stores and refinished by hand. Shelves hung crooked at first until I learned to use anchors. The imperfections made it mine. I created rituals to make the space feel sacred. Shoes came off at the door. Mail was sorted immediately, never piled. On Sundays, I placed fresh flowers in a thrifted vase and simmered pasta sauce on the stove, letting the smell wrap around me like a promise that I was safe. It wasn't just an apartment, it was a sanctuary. After a lifetime of being told I was capable enough to need nothing, I had built a place that finally gave something back. But life outside those walls pressed in. My relationship of 2 years with Thomas, a man I thought understood me, began to fray. At first, it was small disagreements about schedules, but soon every conversation felt like walking on a crack in thin ice. Then, one evening over takeout, he casually mentioned he had accepted a new job in Seattle. He had already signed the papers. He didn't ask me what I thought, didn't consider how it would affect us. The message was clear. My voice wasn't part of his decision. I tried to smile, tried to act supportive, but when he left that night, I cleaned the counters until my hands ached. I moved the couch to vacuum underneath, as if erasing dust could erase the hollow space opening inside me. The next morning, I sat on the island I had restored, staring at the city through streaked glass, and told myself I'd survive. I always survived. Claire visited a week later, claiming she wanted to cheer me up. She wandered through the apartment, touching the furniture, opening cabinets like she was shopping. She smiled at the light pouring through the windows, then laughed. "Well, at least you'll always have the apartment." Her tone was playful, but something about it made my stomach twist. I brushed it off, telling myself I was too raw from the breakup, too sensitive. Still, the words clung to me. At least you'll always have the apartment. I pushed the unease aside and threw myself into routines. Work, grocery runs, watering the plants, trying new recipes. I framed a picture of my grandmother and placed it on the bookshelf. I pinned one of her recipe cards inside a kitchen cabinet. I wrote down small goals: learn a new dish, start a pottery class, reorganize the closet. Guarding my sanctuary wasn't on the list. I thought the lock on my door was enough. But here's the truth. When you finally build something beautiful, people notice. And sometimes, the ones who notice aren't the ones you want inside. My sanctuary was about to become Claire's target. I just didn't know how far she was willing to go. It started small, the way most boundary breaks do. Claire asked to borrow a black cocktail dress for an interview. I said yes, because saying no still felt like causing trouble. When I came home, the dress was gone, along with 2 pairs of heels in a handbag I had saved up for on my 30th birthday. I texted her. She replied with a heart emoji and said she needed to look professional. I stared at the screen and felt that familiar mix of confusion and guilt. Was I overreacting again? A week later, I walked in from a long day at work and found Claire on my couch. The concierge had let her in. She waved like it was cute. I was in the neighborhood. I needed sister time. She pulled a blanket over her legs and asked if I had any snacks. I told her to call first next time. She laughed and said I was uptight. When she left, I noticed my sweater draped over her arm. Then, the unannounced visits multiplied. I would unlock my door and hear music playing. Claire would be in my kitchen, slicing cheese like she lived there. She would say her roommates were impossible. The apartment was loud, and she needed peace. She would open my cabinets and compliment my dishes like a shopper in a boutique. Once, she used my laptop because hers was acting weird. I told her to stop. She rolled her eyes. Here is the part that people online will never forgive me for. I did not change the locks. I did not march down to the front desk and demand an alert on my file. I told myself I was being fair, that I just needed to talk to her, that she would listen. I was raised to use my words, to solve family problems by being reasonable. I did not want to be the sister who escalated. I thought being calm was the higher ground. Now I know calm can look like permission. The night that shook me felt like a scene I had wandered into by mistake. I had been out of town for 2 days, on a client pitch. My flight landed late. When I opened my door, a warm rush of wine and candle smoke hit me. There were plates on the counter and empty bottles by the sink. My rug had a purple stain under the coffee table. A jacket I did not recognize hung on the chair. Voices from earlier still seemed to echo off the walls. I walked to my bedroom and stopped cold. My journal lay open on the duvet, the ribbon marker folded back like a finger. A lipstick smudge, the color Claire loved, sat on a glass beside it. I called her with my keys still in my hand. She answered cheerful, then defensive when she heard my voice. It was just a couple friends. We needed somewhere quiet. I knew you would understand. We cleaned up. I stood in that not clean room and felt my chest throb. You read my journal. She said it was open. She said I was being dramatic. She said family shares. I went to the building office the next morning and asked to speak with the manager. He looked at my file on his screen and tilted his head. Your parents called a few weeks ago, he said. They asked about adding Claire to your lease. They said you were fine with it. He smiled, like this was a small administrative matter. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I told him they did not speak for me. I told him not to let anyone into my home without my permission. He nodded and said of course. Then he mentioned that Claire was a familiar face to the front desk and that family access is common. Common does not mean consent, I said. He finally understood. I wish I could tell you that I marched straight home and changed everything. What I did instead was sit at my island and make a list, talk to Claire, talk to my parents, set rules, give one last chance. I wanted the conversation to fix it. I wanted them to choose respect because it mattered to me. I wanted to believe I was not alone in wanting my life to be mine. I met Claire for coffee and laid out the rules. No entry without approval. No borrowing without asking. No guests. She stirred her drink slowly and said, "We are sisters. What is yours is mine." She called me controlling. She threatened to call our parents. I said, "Do it." That night, my phone lit up with a family dinner invitation marked important. I could feel the decision forming around me, like wet cement. And I could already see what they were planning to set in it. I flew back from a 3-day trip, feeling proud. The pitch had gone well. My boss hinted at a promotion if the client signed. I carried that fragile good mood up the elevator like a glass bird. The moment I opened my door, it fell and shattered. Wine smell, old food, sticky countertops, the sink stacked with plates that were not mine, towels damp on the bathroom floor, expensive skincare, open and half gone, guest blankets I kept in the hall closet tossed across the couch. My chest went hot and hollow at the same time. I walked to my bedroom and stopped. My journal lay open again. Not an accident. Pages turned, corners creased. I could feel the indent of a pen where I had written about therapy, about fear, about money. Next to it, another glass with that same lipstick shade. I was not shaking. I was cold in a way that made my fingers feel far away. I called Claire. She answered like nothing was wrong. When I told her what I saw, she switched to wounded and said her roommates were hostile and she needed quiet. And I was her sister, and I always judged her. She called me rigid. She said we were family. She said I was overreacting. Something in me snapped without making a sound. I did not yell. I did not beg. I hung up. That night I sat at the island I had sanded and sealed with my own hands and made a new list. Not a list for talking, a list for protecting. I ordered 2 small cameras online. Motion triggered. Cloud storage. No one needed to know but me. I told myself I wanted proof because my parents only listened to evidence. I also told myself I needed to see the truth without Claire's version layered on top of it. While I waited for the package, I spoke to the building manager again. I put a note on my file. No access without my approval. No exceptions. I asked the concierge to call me if anyone requested entry. He looked embarrassed and said he understood. I believed him. I did not trust him. The cameras arrived 2 days later. I placed one tucked inside a plant on the bookshelf facing the living room. I placed the second high on a kitchen shelf, angled toward the entry and hallway. I tested the feeds. I set alerts. I left for work with my phone on loud, for the first time in months. That afternoon, My phone buzzed. Motion detected. Another buzz. Another. I stepped into a stairwell between meetings and opened the app. There she was, Claire walking in like a tour guide, 2 people behind her. She opened my mail. She tested perfumes on her wrist. She took the journal from my nightstand and laughed at a page while someone poured wine. She tried on my jacket and asked her friend if the color made her look rich. I watched my life on a screen and felt like I had left my body. That night, I did not confront her. I printed screenshots. I saved the clips. I labeled folders by date and time. Then I did something I had only imagined on bad nights. I started looking for a new place, not across town, across a line my family could not cross. A 4th-floor walk, up in Wicker Park with creaky floors, and a view of trees, smaller, older, but clean of history. I saw it on a Thursday and signed on Friday. I paid the deposit from my emergency fund. The landlord, a woman named Harriet, handed me the keys and said, "Welcome home." I opened a new bank account at a credit union across the city. I forwarded mail to a post office box. I told work to update my records. I brought a box to the office each day and carried it to the new place after hours. Books, photos, the recipe card with my grandmother's handwriting, a few pieces of cookware, clothes. I left the couch. I left the bed frame. I left the things that felt tainted. The River North apartment would look lived in from a distance, but it would not hold me anymore. For 6 weeks, I lived like a ghost. I answered family texts with short lines. I skipped Sunday dinners with excuses about deadlines. I paid the mortgage so no one would ask questions. I slept under new bedding in a room that smelled like fresh paint and laundry soap. I learned the coffee shop on the corner and the side door that stuck when it rained. I started to breathe like a person who was not braced for a door to open. Then my mother's text lit my phone. Emergency family dinner tomorrow night. No excuses. 6 sharp. The word emergency did not make my pulse jump. It made me tired. I knew what was coming. I also knew I was not walking in empty-handed this time. I printed one more set of stills and slid them into a plain folder. I set my alarm early. I pressed my blazer and tucked the folder inside my bag. When I pulled into my parents' driveway the next evening, the porch light was already on, and I could see the shape of my father at the dining table. A set of keys sat gleaming under the chandelier like a dare. The moment I walked in, I knew. The table was set like a stage. China plates, polished silver, pot roast steaming in the center. And right there, under the chandelier, sat a set of keys. My keys. My father cleared his throat, his voice steady with authority. "Your sister needs help, Rachel. We talked to your building manager. Claire can stay at your place until she gets back on her feet." My mother chimed in, eyes wide with expectation. "It's only temporary. You work all the time. The apartment is empty anyway. This makes sense." Across the table, Claire smirked, twirling her fork. "Don't worry, Rach. I'll keep it cleaner this time." I stared at the keys. The room quiet, except for the tick of the dining room clock. "That's funny," I said slowly, "because I haven't lived there for 6 weeks." The silence was instant. My mother's hand froze in midair. My father blinked, his certainty faltering. Claire's smirk vanished. "What do you mean?" my father demanded. "I mean," I said, "I moved. I still pay the mortgage. But I don't live there anymore. I left after Claire trashed my place, invited strangers, and read my journal." My mother gasped. "Rachel, be reasonable. Your sister was in crisis. She needed quiet. She needed boundaries," I said, "and you refused to enforce them." My father pushed the keys closer. "The manager already agreed to add Claire to your lease. It's done." I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. Inside were still photos with timestamps. Claire entering with friends, Claire opening my mail, Claire laughing with my journal in her hands. My mother covered her mouth. "What is this?" "Evidence," I said evenly. "I installed cameras after the last mess. If anyone enters my apartment without permission again, I'll call the police, family or not." Claire's face turned red. "You spied on me. That's illegal." "It's legal to protect my home," I said. "What you did was illegal." My father leaned forward, anger rising. "You would press charges against your own sister?" "If I have to," I answered, "because clearly words mean nothing in this family." My mother tried again, her voice trembling. "We raised you to support each other." "No," I said, standing. "You raised me to carry everything. You raised me to survive with less while Claire got more. That ends now." Claire pushed back her chair, demanding, "Then where are you living? Who with? Give me the address." I shook my head. "No one gets that address. Not until I can trust my privacy again." "You'll regret this," my father warned. I picked up my coat, slipping the folder back into my bag. "The only thing I regret is waiting this long." The keys stayed gleaming on the table. My parents sat frozen. Claire's eyes filled with frustrated tears. I turned toward the door, hand on the knob, and heard my mother whisper, "Rachel, what happens now?" I didn't answer. The sound of the lock clicking behind me was enough. The days after that dinner felt strangely quiet. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't a command center for family emergencies. The silence was heavy at first. I had been trained to respond, to fix, to sacrifice. But slowly, it turned into peace. In my Wicker Park apartment, I unpacked the last boxes, lit a candle, and realized I was breathing easier than I ever had in my life. My parents tried their usual tactics at first. Voicemails about family obligation, messages filled with guilt. But I didn't cave. I responded when I wanted, in my own time, never revealing where I lived. Claire's texts swung between anger and apology. But I didn't chase her anymore. For once, I let her sit with her own choices. Therapy became my anchor. Week after week, I untangled years of believing love had to be earned. Dr. Reeves reminded me that boundaries aren't walls. They're doors that I control. I decide when to open them and for whom. That truth reshaped me. Months passed, and change began to ripple. My father admitted, for the first time, that maybe they had leaned too hard on me because I seemed strong. My mother, through tears, said she didn't realize how deeply her favoritism had cut me. Their words weren't perfect, but they were a beginning. Even Claire surprised me. One short text that read, "I started therapy. I know I owe you more than an apology. I'll get there." I didn't forgive overnight, but I learned forgiveness isn't about erasing pain. It's about refusing to let that pain define you. In my new neighborhood, I built a chosen family. I joined a book club, planted herbs in a community garden, and started cooking elaborate meals just for the joy of it. I even rediscovered writing, filling notebooks not with secrets to guard, but with stories I wanted to tell. My life wasn't waiting for permission anymore. It was mine. The lesson I carry is simple. Family doesn't mean surrender. Love doesn't mean self-erasure. Protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's survival. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do for the people you love is refuse to play the role they wrote for you. Because love without respect isn't love. It's control. And I choose love for them and for myself on healthier, truer terms.